This video is about nuancing, consolation, and desolation. Nuancing, consolation, and desolation. Just to recap our main ideas, we discern because we want to choose that which deepens God's life in us. Discernment of spirits only makes sense in the context of a personal relationship with God. In Ignatian spirituality, discernment is a response of love to God's outpouring, overflowing love for us. When we discern, we focus not only on external circumstances of our life, but more so on our interior experiences. The various movements that arise within, evoked by exterior facts, such as thoughts, imaginings, emotions, inclinations, desires, repulsions, and attractions. Ignatius believed that these interior movements were caused by good spirits and evil spirits. Discernment of spirits comes out of the spiritual warfare and struggle described by the Desert Fathers and Mothers and in the Bible itself. Ignatius saw what was going on within him as a battle between good and evil fighting for his soul. The feelings stirred up by good and evil spirits are called consolation and desolation in the language of Ignatian spirituality. And we have had an opportunity to exercise what are consolation and desolation experiences. We have been given some examples of it, and we try to recognize consolations and desolation experiences in our lives. But are all good feelings what we can call or refer to as consolation? And are all bad feelings desolation? First, let us look at the different meanings of consolation. In the normal sense, or when you look at the usual meaning of consolation in any dictionary, more or less this is what you will get. Consolation, in its usual meaning, refer to something that makes someone feel better. So we make another person feel better, especially after they've been disappointed or sad. So consolation refers to the act of making someone feel better, like trying to make them laugh, but it can also be something that makes someone happy, like a plate of warm cookies. In Ignatian spirituality, however, consolation is an experience of interior joy, consisting in seeing God's presence in everything. So there is a joy that comes upon the person as a result of seeing God's presence in the experience, in the event, or in the relationship. It strengthens faith and hope, and even the ability of doing good. Spiritual consolation is experienced when our hearts are drawn toward God, even if this happens in circumstances that the world would regard as negative. This is very important to note, that spiritual consolation can be experienced even if this happens in circumstances that the world would regard as negative. Consolation is the experience of this deep connectedness to God, and it fills our being with a sense of peace and joy. I hope we already note here the difference between the usual or ordinary meaning of consolation and what consolation means in the language of Ignatian spirituality. Desolation, again in its usual or common meaning, refers to a state of a place that is empty or where everything has been destroyed. Desolation is depressing and bleak. It's like when people arrive at scenes of natural disasters like tornadoes, they often speak about desolation around them. They usually are talking about the destruction, but they are also implying a sense of emptiness and hopelessness. Desolation can refer to a state of being sad and alone. Now, turning again to the meaning of desolation in Ignatian spirituality, spiritual desolation is characterized by our relationship with God. In spiritual desolation, God feels far away. Prayer is dry, difficult, and unappealing, and we can feel tempted to abandon or lessen our faith practices. Perhaps an example is going to help. Okay, let us first look at the gray-colored figures here. We see it written there, events and experiences, feelings, and then movements and actions. Now, let's look first at an event that we can experience in life or can come upon us or happen to us. In this case, let's imagine that the event that we are looking at is winning millions in a lottery, example, no? So when you win millions in a lottery or whatever kind of contests you engaged in, winning millions actually will bring about the event or experience of winning millions will bring about a particular feeling. And most of us would be ecstatic. No? We would feel very, very happy, extremely happy when this happens to us, when we win millions. So the feeling that that event evoked or gave rise to in us is the feeling of being ecstatic or extremely happy. Now, let us notice where that feeling of being ecstatic can move us to. It can move us one way, let's say, to a movement of self-preservation. In other words, I'm going to keep everything that I have won for myself, for my security in the future. I'm not even thinking of sharing it with anyone. After all, I also kind of invested in that lottery. And so the movement from extreme happiness is that of self-preservation, not wanting to share even a single % of what we have won to anyone for that matter. So that's a natural movement of action, but it can be seen as a spiritual desolation because it is making us turn to ourselves. Okay? Now, that feeling of deep joy or deep happiness can also move us to gratitude and generosity. And we will feel that we would like to share our joy. We would like to be able to share the blessing that came upon us by giving it to people we love, or maybe we find ourselves choosing a particular charity and we would like to contribute to that particular charity part or perhaps all of that we have won in the lottery. That movement going out of oneself, going to others, no, and perhaps supporting a charity, a charitable work that will improve the lot of other people, we can refer to that as spiritual consolation, a movement out of oneself to other people, and something that is sharing in the generosity of God. Okay, next example. Again, we notice that there are events and experiences which evoke or elicit or provoke certain feelings, and then these feelings actually move us to particular actions. And these movements is what will help us see whether we are in a spiritual consolation or in the state of spiritual desolation. So let's imagine that you are in a retreat, okay? And in that retreat, at some point, you became aware that you are really a person capable of sinning. You became aware of your faults, of your flaws, of how you have sinned against yourself, against others, against God. Now, that kind of awareness of sinfulness will evoke feelings of shame, guilt, and contrition. Okay? That doesn't feel very good. When we feel shame, guilt, and contrition, on the feeling level, we feel uncomfortable with such feelings. No, that doesn't give us a good feeling. Now, let us look at where that not so good feeling evoked by our awareness of our sinfulness can go. From shame, guilt, and contrition coming from our awareness of sinfulness, we may be moved to seek forgiveness and amend our ways. We might find ourselves going to prayer, asking for God's forgiveness, or perhaps be inspired to go to confession, or simply make sure that the following or from on the days that follow, you are going to really do your best to change your ways. So the desire for forgiveness, the desire for reconciliation with people whom we have offended is a movement towards God, and therefore it's a movement of spiritual consolation. On the other hand, the same feeling of guilt, shame, and contrition can move another way. Like we can feel hopeless and say, I really cannot do this. Even if I ask for forgiveness now, I'm not sure, or I'm almost certain that I will fall into the same sin again. And so you may find yourself giving up hope on yourself, despairing, not anymore believing that you are capable of changing. Yes, capable of falling again, but also capable of being able, at least maybe for a short period of time, to see some improvement in yourself. So when we give up on ourselves, when we lose hope, when we despair, that is a movement away from God. And so it is spiritual desolation. Note the same experience, right, giving rise to the same feelings, but the feelings can move you either way. A movement towards God or a movement away from God. And that is what will spell out whether we are in spiritual consolation or spiritual desolation. Now, the same experience can also evoke feelings different from the first one of shame, guilt, and contrition. In fact, we might find ourselves complacent. Why? We can say, yeah, sure, this doesn't feel good. This isn't right. Yes, I'm capable of sinning. But I will say, but God will forgive me anyway. Okay? So that's an experience of complacency. And this is true. Yes, God will forgive me all the time, anytime. God will never give up on me. But on my end, I will not try hard enough. Because anyway, I will be accepted even if I don't change. Then we don't feel motivated to make any changes in ourselves. We remain therefore in our sinfulness. So again, this is a movement away from God. So it is an experience of spiritual desolation. The other one is I can feel self-righteous. Oh, sure, I do sin. Oh, sure, I do fail many times. But I look at others who are more sinful than I am. Sure, I sin, but I'm not that bad a sinner or not the worst sinner in the world. Once more, I am not inspired to change myself, in order that I may be more pleasing to God, more loving towards God, more loving towards others. Because God will forgive me anyway, because God's love is unconditional. And not only that, compared to other people, I am not that sinful. Now, those are movements away from God or movements towards oneself. And therefore, we are in a state of spiritual desolation. So, in these two examples, you notice one is a positive feeling, but can still bring us to spiritual desolation. In this case, it is a negative experience giving rise to negative feelings, but can still move us towards spiritual consolation. Therefore, we have to be more aware that there is such a thing called emotional states and spiritual states. So, the spiritual states refer to movement towards God, which is spiritual consolation, and movements away from God, which is spiritual desolation. That's on the spiritual level. On the feeling, emotional reaction level, then we simply either get into a good feeling or we get into a bad feeling as a result of the experiences or the events that we experience in life. So, if on the emotional state, I feel positive, I feel good, that is the feeling that is evoked by the event or the experience, okay, such as a sense of confidence in God and of His love for us and for the world. No, perhaps you were in prayer, and in prayer you just felt very, very deeply a confidence that God loves us and loves the world. And then you feel that your life is such a gift from God. No? And so that makes us feel good on the emotional feeling. And that makes us, let's say, grateful to God for the blessing of our life, for God's love for us. So we call that easy consolation. You feel good on the emotional side or level, and you are moved by that good feeling towards God. But we can also have a good feeling, but actually it is a good feeling that moves us away from God. What is an example of a good feeling that moves us away from God? The movement of love or desire which takes us away from God. No? What is this? It's like an affair. No? You have an affair. You're not anymore happy with your old relationship. And now there's a new relationship that's more exciting, that has all the things you are looking for that are no longer in the old relationship. So that's a love and desire. It makes us feel good, but it is something that makes us move away from God. The other one is an attraction to less good. Let's say somebody have hurt you and you have now a strong desire to take revenge. No? And your revenge, the desire for revenge may be actually valid. No? But that desire for revenge, though valid and gives us a good feeling that we will be able to take revenge in the other, is actually an attraction to the less good. But again, because it feels good on the emotional state, it is easy, but in this regards to spiritual state, it is actually an experience of desolation. So we can talk about easy consolation and easy desolation. And then you have the experience of getting a bad feeling from what you are experiencing. Like as we said, an awareness of being a sinner and of meeting and receiving and of needing and receiving God's forgiveness. No? So I'm a sinner and I realize I need God's forgiveness. No? when we love someone, we want to immediately say sorry and be reconciled because we don't feel good when we have hurt somebody else, no? Somebody whom we love in particular. No? And so that is an example of consolation. Difficult because I didn't feel good looking at myself and my sinfulness. But I immediately felt this desire to say sorry in order that I may be immediately reconciled with the person I love. And so that is a movement towards God. So that's an example of difficult because it doesn't feel good on the emotional level, but consolation because the difficult feeling moved us towards God. So a difficult feeling can move us towards God. Right? The other example would be a longing to work in the struggle for the kingdom. Now, longing to work for the kingdom, for justice, for truth, no matter what the cost will be to myself, that's a good desire, that's a holy desire, but that will entail difficulties. But in spite of the difficulties it carries, we feel that we still are on fire to do it for the beloved. So that makes it consolation. But we know that it will carry with it some trouble, and yet we don't mind it because we want to do it out of love. Then it is difficult consolation. And lastly, we speak about difficult desolation. So on the feeling level, what you are realizing is making you feel low, bad, sad, and at the same time, you have lost trust in God. You are not able to bring yourself to ask for forgiveness, for instance, okay? But instead get discouraged with oneself and give up on oneself. And that is what makes it desolation. Instead of turning to God, we remain focused in our flaws, in our inability to overcome it completely, instead of trusting that it is by God's grace that we will be able to overcome it. So it's a weakening of a loss of confidence in God and His love, leading to profound discouragement. See, Lord, you're giving me difficulties. And so I'm slowly losing my trust in you that you don't really love me. If you truly love me, you will not give me difficulties, no? Because you see God as the source of our difficulties. Or an inability to accept or trust in God's forgiveness, no? This time, you are not able to receive forgiveness. You remain in your guilt, in your shame. You're not able to open yourself to God's forgiveness. No? Some of us are actually feel more at peace when we get punishment. Because then we say, okay, that puts us on equal level. I have sinned and you have punished me. It's hard when I have sinned to receive forgiveness because that puts me on a level of vulnerability towards my God. It makes me realize that really there is a force bigger than I am, a force that can forgive me. Because on my own, I will not be able to stop myself from committing sins. But that's why we need a savior. We cannot save ourselves. But if I am not able to turn and allow myself to be saved, that is when we experience difficult desolation. So this is what it is, no? It's not very important for you to remember the terms, easy consolation, easy desolation. The important thing is to be aware that such dynamics exist. So feeling positive may bring you to consolation or desolation. Very often, when we feel positive, it's very difficult to see it as desolation because it feels good. When we're feeling bad, we tend to immediately conclude that we are in desolation, but bad feelings can make us turn to God, and so it becomes a consolation. However, when bad feelings make us all the more turn in on ourselves, then that's when we experience difficult desolation. So we will move on in one of our praxis where we are going to nuance our experiences of consolation and desolation. And I hope that this presentation will make it easier for you to do that.